how I was going to take it as.
It is. It absolutely is. So, all right, we should be live now, which is great.
Yeah, I got my makeup on. I'm good.
Fantastic.
I'm missing the mug, though.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, man, I feel so left out.
Well, Kristen's left-handed, so she gets the left-handed side of the mug.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. That's
Bigger one.
Yep. So
that's the hero theme.
we'll give it another minute or so. Let some more people join, and then we'll kick this off.
Yeah, sounds good. I think it's really cool that people are watching it after the fact on YouTube and stuff.
I do too. It's pretty exciting.
Well, I think it's amazing how quickly your morning flies by. So like even scheduled meetings are hard to get.
That's for sure. That's why we publish these after the fact and figure then people can watch them, subscribe to our channel, and get notified when we have new ones. So, well, it is 9 o'clock, so I'm going to kick this off. I first would like to thank everyone who is online viewing this live. And then, of course, thank our featured guest today, Kristen DeMarree. Kristen, thank you for being here with us for our quick, 30-minute webinar or Agri-Trak coffee chat. So I would love if you could give us a little introduction and tell us about yourself, and then we'll jump right in.
So I'm Kristen DeMarree. I'm a third-generation apple grower in Williamson, New York. So we run, it's a relatively actually small farm. We only run around 200 acres, but over the past generation of my parents, they've been slowly converting the farm from processing to fresh fruit. So we were now at a very high focus on fresh, high-density orchards. So I have an interesting background too, because I didn't originally go into farming. I was actually a physical therapist for a couple of years, and then slowly started fading back into farming part-time, and now I'm back full-time, or have been back full-time now for a little bit. So it's
that's a shift.
But not quite the normal story of agriculture. So, but I think it was actually really beneficial for me to do something different first, to get like a very kind of unique perspective on coming back to the farm.
Well, so that's an awesome segue into what was the factor that made you say, okay, I really want to do this full time?
Hold on, I'm going to guess. Apples need therapy.
Yeah. I make the joke now that I went from all my patients were people, then now all my patients are trees. So each tree I take care of.
That's awesome.
So, yeah. So I had always I really enjoyed physical therapy, and I always, when I was doing physical therapy in grad school, and then also when I graduated, I was doing a lot of research in physical therapy. So I really enjoyed the research side of things. And then slowly I started doing travel physical therapy, where I worked half-time or part of the year on the farm, and then the other part of the year when the farm wasn't busy, I would go do physical therapy. But kind of I realized more and more that I was enjoying doing the farm more than I was enjoying doing the physical therapy. So I slowly, and then kind of COVID became much more challenging to do travel therapy for physical therapists. Nursing had a boom. So I just spent more and more time on the farm, and then realized, I really enjoy this. And I initially, I really thought about it for 9 months of whether or not I wanted to come back and do this full time. And I didn't talk to any of my family members about it, my parents, my sisters. I talked to a couple close friends, because I wanted no bias in making the decision. And then once I did, I asked my mom one day, and I'm like, do you think I could do this? And she's like, oh yeah, you could definitely do it. So, and then I kind of gave me the confidence of being like, yep, I'm going to do it. So, and I've loved
awesome.
it. Yeah.
So, we always talk about, or people often think of farms as multi-generational farms. So I'm somebody who's from a multi-generational farm. I swore up and down I was not going to come back to the farm. I wasn't going to be a part of the farm. And here I am, not only owning a farm with my husband, but creating apps for farmers. So it's interesting, that draw that you get kind of pulled back into the community. I think you're just born into this lifestyle, and it is a lifestyle for sure. You have to be okay with the sort of ups and downs that come along with this profession, but definitely a draw for the multi-generations to come back, I think.
Yeah. And I think too, there's like when you're younger, such a stereotype around farming and what is a farmer. And I feel like unfortunately it's a pretty negative stereotype where like, you didn't go to college or you don't receive education and you kind of just stayed on the farm. And like that is not, in my experience, that has not been the case at all. There's a lot of very highly educated people, whether they went to school or didn't. I mean, I think my dad, who went to the farm right after like graduating high school, I think he's one of the smartest people that I know. Like he may not be able to tell you the exact like process of photosynthesis, like all the different phases, but he can tell me every single thing it takes to run a farm, know all these different like nutrient levels and soil levels and application rates. And, he has so much practical and like life knowledge that like I would never, like it really does change the stereotype and of what you think about when you're younger of what a farmer is.
For sure.
So.
And do you think, I think I'm seeing a shift in people's thinking about farmers. And I think when I was a kid too, there was definitely this sort of a negative stereotype around who farmers are and who they weren't. I see this shift towards people respecting the profession and realizing like that's where your food comes from. Do you sense that as well?
I would definitely agree. I think there's definitely a lot more, I think with social media, especially like people are getting more of an inside look at how farming works. I mean, you can go on like TikTok or Instagram and now see that like the behind the scenes of how farms run, and it's run by like people from every like gender, every generation. There's a lot more information out there about how farms run, and I think that's really trying to, in my opinion, driving that force. And I think too, like farming, you have to know so much about everything. And there's a lot more science involved than you realize, especially with fresh fruit farming, I have found. Every variety has its own little quirks, and you have to be able to keep track of everything. And it's a lot of work, a lot more work than you think it is.
For sure.
So
what's one thing that you wish the public better understood about farming?
That's a very big question. I think people, I think when they see food in a grocery store, because food is so plentiful and available all year round, you can get whatever you want, that people kind of forget who's behind getting all of that food to the grocery store. I think that it's really important that you support locally. And we want to make sure that the farming communities that are in your community stay in your community, even if it's cheaper potentially to import food and get food at a cheaper price. I think the quality and what's going to be in that food that's grown locally versus imported, you don't always necessarily know those things. So I think it's really important to support local. Like,
sure.
When you see those signs, definitely do it.
I think that's, yeah. And I think it's hard because we're as consumers, right? We're so used to going to the grocery store and having access to apples all year round. And yes, there's, new technology with the controlled atmosphere storages that help hold apples so that they can sell local apples all year round. But that's not the case with all produce. So if you go to the grocery store today and you're buying strawberries, they are definitely not coming from someplace local. And I think that that's difficult because we've conditioned ourselves to eat the produce we want whenever we want it and not just eat seasonally locally. And I think we've had that conversation, I think, with all of our guests on this webinar so far, that like it's a consumer education is really important, but changing behaviors is incredibly difficult.
Yes. Yep. And I think too, like, there's a lot of like really nice farm markets in New York and around New York that do have like local like apples all year round. So I would definitely like encourage people to kind of go out and see what farm markets are out there and support those local guys.
It's a great idea. There's Jason and I have somebody in the startup world who's building an app that will help connect consumers to locally grown produce, which I think is a really cool concept. She connects them to different farmers markets and knows what's for sale, where, and seasonally what's available. I think it's a really cool idea, and I'm excited to see where she takes that.
That's great.
So shifting gears just a little bit, statistics have shown that like family farms are struggling more than ever. And some people are deciding really not to continue farming. We've seen a decline in farms over the last 20 years in the United States. And I'm just curious to know what you think might be the cause of this, or how we could start to change that, if you have any words of wisdom.
Yeah, I think with the decline of, I think farming is becoming riskier and riskier, where farming is 100% dependent on weather. I think a lot of times people forget that, especially if you aren't part of the farming community. Last year we had one cold night in May, and that, thankfully we didn't get as cold here, but south of us, it completely knocked out the entire crop. So you have one bad year of, you now have no income coming in, but you still have those expenses where you have to still spray your trees. You still have to trim your trees. You still have to take care of those orchards, because otherwise then you're going to lead to a whole bunch of disease and problems in the trees. The trees could die. So you still have all of these risks involved, as well as, and farming is really unique because we don't set the price for our fruit. If we sell our fruit to a packing line, they will pack your fruit for you and they will sell your fruit for you. But you don't know if your fruit is going to be packed in December, or you don't know if your fruit is going to be stored until next July. And if that fruit that's stored until next July turns up to be like brown, or the inside turns brown in storage, or something happens in storage, well, all that money comes out of the farmer and the grower. They're the ones that take those risks. So I think there's so much risk involved that if you are already kind of operating where you're making ends meet, you don't have you have pretty tight margins, and you have a year or two where something happens outside of your control, then, as a business, will you make it? Some will, some won't. So I think that's a really stressful and scary thing. I think there is definitely, I think there still is a very negative stereotype around farming to a certain extent, where a lot of people are like, oh, I want to get away from farming. And there's not you're not making 6-figure salaries in farming, most likely. So your average farmer, I'd say. So, the younger generation, can I go and do something in tech, or can I do something in the medical field where I have the potential to earn a lot bigger income, and depending on what you're doing, maybe work less hours, because farming is a lot of hours at certain points of the year. So I think there's definitely so many factors involved in that, whether people choose to pursue something else, or just the risk of being in the business. So
sure. Yeah. So how do we change that? Can we change that?
I don't know.
I know we're going deep today, Kristen.
I know. I think there's always going to be an inherent risk in farming. But I think everybody has anybody that's in farming now, I think really has a true passion for farming. So there will always be farms. I hope, you never know, but I think the size of the farms may get bigger. There might be less family farms, but I think there always will still be farms. But I genuinely I don't quite know what the answer is to solving that problem, to be honest with you.
No, and I think you're right about farms are getting bigger. I think that, you're talking about farming being risky, and it's getting riskier and riskier every year. And the margins are getting smaller and smaller every year. And the only way to really combat that, I think, is to grow your operation, right? So that you're doing the same jobs, but multiplied by whatever factor your farm grows. And that helps reduce, I think, a little of that risk maybe, right? Because the larger you are and the more spread out you are geographically, the better chances you have of like not your entire crop not getting decimated in that one single weather event. So if you can spread out a little bit geographically, but that's not always easy. I look at farmland and the cost, right? So like one of the barriers to entry, if you have a young child who's like, I want to be a farmer someday, you can't. I don't think you can just go into the profession to purchase 200 acres of land, and all of the equipment and the operating costs to get started are astronomical. And I think that's a piece that a lot of people don't fully comprehend is in order to grow your operation, you're paying mortgages on all of this land, right? Whether you have a crop or not. And that adds to that riskiness, I think.
Yep. And I think in where today's kind of climate is at, where we're in a period of oversupply, and you're not getting as much returns for your fruit as we previously had been. I know like us as a business, we're definitely looking at how do we kind of adjust our expenses to kind of reflect the adjustment in income. So any way we can look at efficiencies on the farm is a biggest thing, because labor is our over, I think, 50% of our operating costs. So how can we make our labor more efficient? Is that using more equipment? For us, we've been using a lot of like technology to be able, like not only Agri-Trak to be able to track labor and jobs on the farm, but also looking at how can we track our irrigation and our water needs, because we have to pay, for us, we pay for municipal water. And we're in a county where water is actually like very expensive. So, that's an area where we can look and potentially save some money and be more like efficient with our water use, using technologies to kind of help the process of even just organizing ourselves in the business. Like we use programs now to help with like product or like labeling all the bins we pick during harvest, our shipping, keeping track of how to ship all the bins, which helps with keeping track of records for both knowing like when we've been paid for fruit, but then what is still like left to come in. And then we've also been looking a lot on scanning technologies and being able to in crop load management and being able to have a more desirable number of fruit on the tree. So that way we can hopefully have more better fruit, but also decrease the amount of hand labor involved in trying to get the right number of fruit per tree. So I think for us, we really try to switch our focus. And with me coming in as a younger generation, have more understanding and exposure to technology, is how can we integrate those technology and advances to making us a more efficient business.
That's a really good point. I think we see that we go to a ton of farms and we talk to people all day long about farming, and it's that next generation that feels so comfortable with technology that they're yearning for like a solution. Like, I don't know what the problem is, but there's got to be a tool out there that can help me figure out what this problem is. And I would say your farm notoriously has always been an early adopter of different tools and technology and different just practices, right? Like you guys have been doing reflective fabric under your trees for years. And so I think there's like a component of you might be maybe a little bit more inquisitive and excited about some of these new tools and willing to try, whereas some farms are terrified. Do you have any advice for those farms who are nervous about implementing new technology or trying something new? Can you speak to that a little bit and what that's like for you guys?
Yeah. So I went to the Great Lakes Expo in Michigan this winter, and one of the people brought up like a very important question in the technology session, and they asked like, what problem are you solving? What problem is that technology solving? Can it be solved with a much simpler way, or in a manual way, or is this technology going to be saving me a lot of manual like labor or investment or time? And I think that every farm has their own set of unique problems. So I think first identifying what those problems areas are on your farm, and then kind of seeing what's out there in technology to address those problems. A lot of times, like for me, when I was looking at new, like for irrigation, I spent like first step for me was just Googling what different solutions are there out there for irrigation. I went and talked with our local irrigation rep, but because nobody was really doing anything with automated irrigation or sensors, that wasn't the source I was able to find any like good information from. But I think talking with people like other growers, but I think the biggest thing was IFTA and going out in the International Fruit Tree Association is the IFTA. Meeting with people at the IFTA conference and talking with them from different parts of both the US and also in Europe and seeing what technologies they're doing was incredibly helpful because they could give me a recommendation of like what their technology was, but then also the benefits of using it and also the negatives. Because I can tell you, we've made a lot of like, we're always wanting to try new things, but we are learning, you know, so a lot of times there's a lot of hard ways to learn something if you're the first one to do it. So the next person that wants to install some Bluetooth valves on their farm, let me know because I will tell you all the ways that you don't want to do it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I think speaking with other people and they've had these experiences, it'll save you kind of some troubles and stumbles along the way. And it kind of, I think the farming community is fantastic in that way that if you like go to somebody individually and ask them questions, I think like probably 90% of the time they will be willing to share and to give you a little bit of advice. And a lot of times, a lot of these companies, if you ask the company, hey, what customers do you have that would be willing to speak with me? A lot of times they will give you that information. So, or there's customers that are willing to give you or share that information. So
that's awesome. I think your piece of advice about like what problem am I trying to solve is really valid. I think people look at technology sometimes as that shiny new object and I better use something because everybody else is using something. And I think it's easy to choose the wrong tool if you don't know what your actual problem is you're trying to solve. I see that with a lot of the sort of crop load management tools you're talking about, and the amount of number one investment and time into implementing something like that is huge. You have to know like what information you're looking to get out of that, and then how are you going to interpret that into something that's meaningful on your farm, right? Yes. Because there's a disconnect sometimes, I think, between using the technology and then getting supreme value out of that based on like, what are you going to do with that data you get at the end? And farmers are scientists, but they're not necessarily data scientists. Mm-hmm. And so how do you right? Like if you, I'm just thinking of like my father, I imagine, right? Like a huge amount of data is dumped on him about what's going on in his operation. And what do you do with this? So, you know, I think really understanding what you want to get out of that tool is incredibly important before you decide to jump in and use a new tool in your operation.
Yes. I definitely agree. Like a lot of times when we initially adapt a new technology, we kind of take the first season is kind of like, we're just going to do a lot of different things, get a whole bunch of information. And then at the end of the season, I'll kind of look back at that information and then see, all right, how can I now better apply this information? Because it really is a huge problem where now I have so much data, but am I actually looking at the data and using that data to make management decisions and apply it, then translate it out to my guys that are out in the orchards and changing their behaviors or their habits or something like that. And like, that's a very challenging step right now. Like a lot of the technology, I say like vast majority of technology, none of that does that for you. You have to do that for yourself. Mm-hmm. And I think it's definitely like a process of trying to figure out how do I do that. I think this past winter, we've been doing a lot with crop load management. So and with pruning this winter, we were really like, all right, let's start counting the number of buds on each tree And I want our overall goal, our problem is that we're spending too much time hand thinning. We're spending a lot of money in labor hand thinning. So how can I lower my hand thinning costs? For us, that means we need to be more precise in our pruning so we can decrease the number of initial buds on the tree, but then also we need to be more accurate in our chemical thinning. So with that, that means I need to go out and start counting some buds in the wintertime. But then if I do scans with my camera system, what do I tell my guys? Like, I don't want them actually counting buds on a tree. Like, that's a waste of their time. Like, and if the system says I need to take off 10 buds, how do they know what 10 buds to take off? So I think it's a lot of like thinking about how I can to me, it's been about general rules. What are some simple guidelines that I can have my employees follow to be able to translate that data information to actual results out in the field? And it's a process for sure.
I couldn't agree more, but it's refreshing to talk to somebody who sees that sort of full circle of like, it is important to find a tool to solve your problem. Then to gather the proper data, to know what data you need to gather, to analyze that data, and then to make changes in the operation based on the data that you are interpreting. That is not an easy process. I think one of my questions I was going to ask you is, if you could change anything, magic like flip of the switch or magic wand, what would it be? And I might go there in a minute, but I think for me, being able to close that circle for farms would be the switch I'd like to flip. Like, I would love if we could take all of these tools that exist and create a way that we analyze and interpret that data for farms to provide them with the exact information they need without them having to go out, find it, scour it, analyze it, clean it up and do something with it.
Yeah.
That's a problem that needs to be solved, I think.
Yeah. I think like AI potentially might have those capabilities. And like, if I make the AI read the Cornell recommends guidelines, like what would it tell me? Like, if it takes all this information and give me a recommendation, but how do you make up for 40 years of experience of history on your farm? Like,
that's right.
My dad is a wealth of knowledge, and he's like, oh yeah, well, we had, this one year I've noticed that this one section of the block does this one weird thing, and you got to do this one little weird thing to take care of that weird thing. Like,
just dictate to AI everything he knows. Dad, just start talking.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's like 100%. I really do think we can get there. Is it with AI? I think so. Like, that's going to be one part of the equation, but not the whole part. But it's definitely like in these early kind of adoption years, it's a lot like of how do we connect the dots? And I think it's going to take the growers to connect those dots because the tech people have incredible tech experience. They do not have agricultural or growing a fruit tree experience. So you have to kind of be that gap in their knowledge so they know what they need to be looking for. And I think people also need to, how can you, if you see the value in this company and you're somebody who, well, I don't want to adopt until I get a finished product or they're completely done in the adoption. Well, is the company going to be around by that point if they don't have people that are supporting them? So like, what are ways that you can support them? Is there a way that maybe you and another farm are interested in using certain technology? Can you split the cost and split the, those types of things? Is there ways to kind of work together within somebody else to support the company if you see the value in what they're doing? Because I think that's the only way to make the company survive.
I love that. And as the owner of a startup company, of which your farm has been incredibly supportive of, I can't thank you enough because you're right. We would not be here today if people didn't take a chance on us early on. And this industry, ag tech in general, is a risky industry. It's as risky probably as farming because tech changes really quickly. Adoption is difficult and it's incredibly expensive to build technology tools. I don't know. I don't care how you try and do it. It is just way more expensive, I think, than you might initially think it's going to be. And it takes 10 times longer than you want it to for various reasons. So I love that advice. Find somebody or a company that you want to invest in. And if the investment in that is even just your time to help them get it right, I think that that's really valuable. So thank you for that.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, we only have about 1 minute left here. And so I guess I'm just curious to know if you have one piece of advice for somebody looking to get into this industry, what would it be?
Well, I think there's a lot of value in, so I've never been on so I never was on the farm full time from high school to through. So I can't speak to say like that's the wrong route. But I think every farm does things so differently that it would be a huge, like so advantageous for you to either do internships on other farms, work on other farms, be active in the industry, whether that's attending meetings locally or like IFT that does internationally. There's so many different, you gain so much knowledge and information by talking to other people and attending these conferences or meetings or even just like gatherings, like local gatherings. I think go out and gain information because, a lot of times we've seen a lot of people, well, it's like, this is the way that my dad has done it. This is the way my grandfather has done it. And this is the way I'm going to do it. And I think that mindset is, in the times we are currently in, is going to be a really big barrier to farms being successful and succeeding. That I think you have to go out and try new things, see new things. It can be very small changes at first if you have people that are resistant, but I think, you have to at least start trying something different.
Awesome advice.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for taking time out of your day to join us and chat about this. I think every one of these we put together and the views we're getting after the fact are people who are either interested in something they've never learned before about agriculture, or just like you're saying, people who are out there gathering information and learning from others. And so we're hoping to continue to publish these to give that sort of inside look into what's going on the farms today.
Great. Sounds great. Thanks so much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks. You too.
Bye.
See ya.